From the Netherlands, this is the Green Planet Monitor, voices and stories from a warm, wet planet. Today, ice sheets melting, oceans rising, currents shifting.
This is something that people need to realize. The warming from the last ice age into the Holocene by about 6 or 7 degrees centigrade in global temperature came with a sea level rise by 120 meters, because 2/3 of the ice masses that were there in the last ice age then melted. Now we have 1/3 of this ice still left, that enough to raise global sea level by 65 meters, and we're now heading into several degrees centigrade of global warming. So this is not very good.
Sex and the brain. Women's and men's brains are different.
What we have found is that women in many different tasks process information about 5 times faster than men and use much less of their brain to do identical cognitive performance.
And sonic violence in Lebanese airspace. Israeli fighter jets and drones invade Lebanese skies every day and every night.
When we add up all the duration of the last 15 years of Israeli combat vehicles in the airspace, we get to the staggering number of 8.5 years. So that means for more than half of the last 15 years, there has been Israeli jets or drones in the atmosphere.
This is the Green Planet Monitor. I'm David Kattenberg. As Earth's atmosphere warms, so do its oceans. Simple physics. Water absorbs heat. Earth's oceans have absorbed about 90% of human-generated atmospheric heat. As oceans warm, they expand, and their level rises. Sea level rise has been accelerating steadily since the start of the 20th century. According to the most recent report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, seas are now rising at a rate of about 4 millimeters per year. That may seem small. At business-as-usual rates, though, this could add up to a meter by 2100. But uncertainty is huge. Sea level could rise 2 meters by the end of this century and 5 meters by 2150. Earth's great coastal cities would drown. It gets worse. Melting ice sheets add to sea level rise. As the Greenland ice sheet melts, North Atlantic waters freshen, and the northward circulation of waters from the tropics slows down. The collapse of Earth's great ocean conveyor belt was the subject of a Hollywood disaster movie. It could come true. Stefan Ramstorff studies oceans at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, just outside Berlin. That's where we met.
I would say primarily to most people, Earth is home, basically. It is our home and the only home that we have. There's no way we can all fly off to Mars like Elon Musk sometimes seems to suggest. We don't know of any such, of any planet out there where we could drink the water and eat the plants and live. So we better take good care of the only planet that we have that we can live on. And it is indeed an interconnected system where all the components, the oceans, the atmosphere, also the life, the biosphere, they interact all the time. And in order to understand that, that's why my department is called Earth System Analysis.
When was the last time that oceans were significantly higher than they are today?
Well, the last time was that the oceans were higher was in the Eemian Interglacial, that is about 120,000 years back, that preceded the last ice age. And we have these regular cycles between ice ages and the so-called interglacials that are interludes between the ice ages. These cycles are due to the Earth orbit. I already learned that at school, actually, in the 1970s. It's a very well-known thing that actually has been found in the 1920s already, these so-called Milankovitch cycles driving the ice ages. And we are now leaving an interglacial called the Holocene. We're into the Anthropocene now, and the previous interglacial, the Eemian interglacial, was a little bit warmer than the Holocene, and sea level was several meters higher then. The really big change in sea level, of course, was going into the Ice Age, when at the height of the last Ice Age, 20,000 years ago, sea levels were 120 meters lower than now. And there was a lot of dry land, like the North Sea, etc., where there's ocean now. And so this is something that people need to realize. The warming from the last Ice Age into the Holocene by about 6 or 7 degrees centigrade in global temperature came with a sea level rise by 120 meters, because 2/3 of the ice masses that were there in the last Ice Age then melted. Now we have 1/3 of this ice still left, that enough to raise global sea level by 65 meters, and we're now heading into several degrees centigrade of global warming. So this is not very good.
And how quickly could that happen? I mean, if we were to hit 3 degrees Celsius, of course, the time scale, some people, this might not happen for 100 years, but let's set aside the time scale of these changes for the moment. How high could sea level rise if we were to not achieve 1.5 degrees?
The sea level, of course, is already rising because of the modern global warming. It has started slowly because the ice masses respond quite slowly, and also the thermal expansion of the ocean waters responds quite slowly. So thus far we have only seen about 20 centimeters of global sea level rise since the beginning of the 20th century. Now
20 centimeters.
20 centimeters, exactly. And these 20 centimeters are already causing serious problems. They raise storm surge levels significantly, like Hurricane Sandy hitting New York, for example, with that storm surge. And the last centimeters are always the most expensive when you cross thresholds where the water has never been before. There's no provision made for that. For example, subway tunnels get flooded, like with Hurricane Sandy in New York City. It gets really, really expensive. And that's just 20 centimeters, but the sea level rise is accelerating, and that's also completely as expected, because obviously the warmer it gets, the faster the ice melts, and all we can achieve by stopping global warming is that we then don't speed up the sea level rise. We keep the sea level rising at a constant pace that will go on for many centuries, because for the big ice masses like Greenland and Antarctica to come into a stable equilibrium again with a warmer climate, that will take thousands of years. Depending on our emissions, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, has calculated that we will have between 0.5 meter and 1 meter of sea level rise by the end of this century, which, you know, if it's 1 meter, it will be quite catastrophic for many coastlines. But there is a big uncertainty towards the high end. You know, it could even be 2 meters by the end of this century, and 5 meters by the year 2150. And, you know, much more beyond that. So this sea level rise is slow to start. It has already started. It is accelerating, and it will create massive problems for many centuries to come. And the big ice sheets, they have their tipping points for different reasons. For the Greenland ice sheet, it is a very simple self-amplifying feedback, the so-called ice elevation feedback. The Greenland ice sheet is more than 3,000 meters above sea level at the summit, because it is so thick. It's actually grounded below sea level, but it goes to more than 3,000 meters altitude, and up there, of course, the air is very cold. But if the ice comes down, by melting, the surface comes down to lower levels in the atmosphere, then that will amplify the melting, because it's automatically warmer down there, And there is a critical threshold level when this becomes a self-amplifying thing which cannot be stopped even without further warming. Then the Greenland ice sheet is doomed completely. It will vanish altogether, and that will raise global sea level by 7 meters. In Antarctica, we have also a threshold, a tipping point, but it is different physics. In this case, in Antarctica, we don't have this problem with surface melting because it's too cold. Antarctica is on the South Pole. It's very cold down there, unlike Greenland, which is off the North Pole. It's not on the North Pole. And that's why the problem in Antarctica is not surface melting, but the ice sliding into the ocean. It's also something that is already happening and accelerating. And there is a critical threshold, the so-called marine ice sheet instability there, where this sliding becomes unstoppable until the entire ice sheet is gone. And there was a glaciologist, Antarctic scientist, John Mercer, who already in 1978 in the scientific journal Nature described this mechanism and called this a coming disaster because of the decay of the West Antarctic ice sheet, which according to some studies is already past the tipping point. It's like a point of no return where this ice sheet will get lost just even without further global warming, raising global sea levels by 3 meters. Now that takes several hundred years to run its course completely until until all the ice is gone, basically. But it's a process that is fastest at the beginning. So the rate of sea level rise is actually then reaching quite high levels already in the next decades, even if to run its full course it will take centuries.
And is it the West or the East Antarctic ice sheet which is of the greatest concern?
Currently, the West Antarctic ice sheet is of the biggest concern because already the ice shelves that are out in front of it on the ocean are disintegrating, and this was already something that John Mercer described in 1978, that this would be the first signs, and this is already happening. And this ice flows out onto the ocean because it doesn't melt on the land because it's so cold there, but constantly snow is added on the surface, and so that ice flows into the ocean. And the floating part of that continental ice sheet is called an ice shelf, and these are holding back the ice behind them on the land because the ice shelves also are pinned down on some small islands or shallow parts of the ocean. And but these ice shelves are quite unstable, and they are progressively breaking up, and then it's like pulling the cork out of a bottle. Then the ice behind the ice shelves, they can basically flow faster into the ocean, and that then is the main mechanism for losing continental ice from Antarctica, which raises the sea level. It's already now contributing to sea level rise, and it will become a more and more important component. In the longer run, also parts of the East Antarctic ice sheet are liable to that same marine ice sheet instability. They have their own tipping points, not the entire East Antarctic ice sheet. That is the biggest part. It is very huge. This is more than 50 meters of global sea level worth is the East Antarctic ice sheet. There's no way the whole thing will disintegrate, but there are several parts which may get lost and add several meters of sea level rise again on top of what comes from Greenland and what's coming from the West Antarctic ice sheet. The sea level rise problem indeed is because it's a problem coming on slowly. It's maybe not the best to motivate a lot of people to act fast, although because we had now already 30 years of delay since the Rio Earth Summit, where all the countries decided to prevent a dangerous climate change. This 30 years of delay by lobbying from fossil fuel interests, etc., have taken us to the point where even sea level rise has become an acute problem on many coasts, including on the US East Coast, for example, with the nuisance flooding that you get from Carolina to Boston, etc., even with normal tides, not even with storm surges. But the thing that people around the world are already feeling much more than sea level rise is the increase in extreme weather events. And of course, that has already long been predicted by climate scientists, that heat extremes will increase dramatically if the planet warms. That is obvious even to a layperson, I think, and is completely borne out by the data. We have massive heat wave problems by now, which are actually quite deadly. In Europe, this last summer, there was around about 100,000 extra mortality due to heat. Also, extreme rainfall events are on the rise, as climate scientists have predicted already 30 years ago. There's simple physics behind that too. Warmer air can hold more moisture, which will then rain down if the conditions are right, causing more extreme rainfall events. Practically all the additional evaporation from the oceans that we're getting because the Earth is warming is going into extreme rainfall events, whereas the kind of more regular, steady, moderate rain that agriculture depends on so much is becoming ever smaller share. That is, again, there's physical reasons behind that has been predicted, and the data show that this is exactly happening. And that's why we get increasing problems, not just with extreme rainfall and flooding, but also with drought and wildfires. These things are all these predictions by climate scientists are coming true, some even faster than predicted. So climate scientists have been quite cautious in the past and unfortunately have underestimated a few impacts. We haven't underestimated the global temperature increase that is developing exactly as has been predicted since the 1970s and 80s already, but we have underestimated some of the impacts, including in my own field, the speed at which sea level would rise. That had to be corrected up and up in subsequent reports by the IPCC because it has been greatly underestimated initially.
What's the North Atlantic meridional overturning circulation? How is this changing? How is it shifting? Is it shifting?
Yeah. One of my main areas of research since the early 90s actually is the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. I started on this as a young postdoc right after my PhD in physical oceanography, and this overturning circulation is bringing huge amounts of heat to the North Atlantic, and they are giving it off to the atmosphere, and is the reason why the North Atlantic is several degrees, about 5 degrees Celsius warmer than the North Pacific at similar latitudes, and why Europe, which is downwind from that warm ocean, has a much milder climate than other parts of the globe on that same latitude. For example, Britain is entirely north of the United States, leaving aside Alaska. Britain is north of any of the other US states, but obviously has a relatively mild habitable climate because of that heat transport, which is for lay people, it's often associated with the Gulf Stream, but that is only a part of the whole system, and we call it the Atlantic overturning circulation.
And how does that system work?
That system is driven by the water giving off heat in the high latitudes in the northern Atlantic to the atmosphere, and thereby the ocean water gets cold, and that increases the density, and it sinks down there from the surface down to about 2,000 to 3,000 meters depth. And for that to happen, it mustn't only be cold, it also has to be saline enough. There has to be enough salt in that seawater. And that salt is constantly resupplied from water coming from further south, from the subtropics, where you get a lot of evaporation in the subtropics. The water is very salty, and the overturning itself transports the salt to the high latitude North Atlantic, think south of Greenland there, and this salt helps the water to sink there, and that's why we have a self-stabilizing feedback. This overturning circulation is going because it's salty enough south of Greenland, and it's salty enough because that overturning circulation is running and bringing constantly salt from the subtropics. And
so that system stabilizes the climate.
It is a self-stabilizing system, and it is responsible for the climate that we have had for the last 10,000 years, where this circulation has been running since the end of the last ice age. But like all these self-stabilizing systems, it has a tipping point. So when you weaken it too much, then there is not enough salty water coming anymore from the subtropics. Therefore, fresh water is accumulating near the surface because there's net rainfall into the area. There's now also increasing meltwater from Greenland, which is also fresh water, not salty. And so a freshwater lid forms at the surface and prevents the sinking down to the depth, and that drives the whole circulation. So this Atlantic overturning circulation can grind to a halt once we pass that threshold. That was the kind of storyline of this famous Hollywood movie, The Day After Tomorrow, where, of course, they had condensed this into a matter of weeks, which in reality would take a few decades, this process.
Just a few decades?
Yeah, that would take a few decades.
And when was the last time it stopped?
This was at the end of the last ice age, because there also we had a big melting of ice sheets, continental ice, adding fresh water to the North Atlantic, and that basically did exactly what I just described, what might happen in the future as well if we melt too much of the Greenland ice sheet. A freshwater lid forms, it dilutes the salty ocean waters, the density is then not enough to sink, the water that's already down there has a higher density then, so the whole circulation grinds to a halt. There is already signs that the Atlantic overturning circulation is weakening, as predicted by climate models, another prediction coming true. The climate models show that with global warming, you get one patch of the Earth which is not warming, but rather even cooling, and that is this so-called North Atlantic cold blob south of Greenland, which is a result of the slowing of the Atlantic overturning circulation. This cold blob that you can see in the old predictions of the IPCC for global warming is already now in the observations. It's actually the only part of the globe that hasn't warmed in the last 100 years but has cooled, is the northern North Atlantic south of Greenland and Iceland. And this is because of that huge heat transport coming up from the south into that region is weakening. There is less heat coming up now, and this is why that region is cooling. And should we cross this critical threshold where the circulation really winds down altogether, then this existing cold patch would expand, and even now it's only out over the ocean, but it would expand to go even over parts of Europe, northwestern parts of Europe, like Great Britain and Scandinavia. Germany would be affected then by cooling rather than, warming, with all the rest of the world around is still warming then. Now, the Atlantic overturning circulation is so big that we're talking about millions of cubic meters per second, and actually currently it's about 17 million cubic meters per second. we estimate from that cold blob that has developed in the North Atlantic that it has weakened by about 15% since the 1950s.
It's astonishing that human beings seem to have altered the surface of the Earth geologically, that human beings are a geological force that seems to have caused Earth to depart from the bounds of variability in the Holocene, and that we're now in a brand new epoch, the Anthropocene. Did you follow this debate?
Personally, I'm not surprised at all that human activities are changing the planet, because we have long known that biology has changed the planet massively. Just think of the great oxidation when in the evolution of life, photosynthesis was invented and plants started producing a lot of oxygen. This has completely changed our atmosphere. So long before humans arrived, biology is an integral component of the Earth system, which has a massive influence on the Earth. And by now, if you look at the biomass of land animals, this is 97% of that is humans and their domestic animals, and there's only 3% of the animals on land are still wild animals. And so we are so completely dominating now also the biology of the Earth's surface with our activities that is not surprising that we are creating big changes here. Also, think of the carbon cycle. It's another way to look at this. It has taken 100 million years to form the deposits of coal and oil and natural, or we should say fossil gas in the Earth's crust. The resources that we have discovered and are now using as an energy source, and we are burning every year. We are burning as much as has formed in a million years, and therefore we have basically created a shortcut in the carbon cycle of our planet and releasing huge amounts of CO2 that have taken millions of years to slowly come down in the last around about 100 million years. And the CO2 levels we have created now are already the highest that have been around for at least 15 million years on this planet in the atmosphere. And so it's, to me as a climate scientist, it's completely obvious that humans have become a geologic force, and not only by using fossil fuels and emitting CO2, although that's of course one of the more obvious things, but also by deforestation. You know, we have really changed the land surface completely by using it for agriculture and cutting down forests. And if we're talking about the oceans, we have really changed the ocean biology massively by overfishing and really depleting the huge abundance of fish that have been in the ocean. If you read old reports from the 19th century, say, nowadays people can't imagine how full of fish the oceans were back then. We've forgotten about this. This is a kind of shifting baseline problem. We don't even see and realize often how much we have destroyed.
So human beings have transformed the Earth.
Human beings have massively transformed the Earth, and we are still continuing, although basically we are at a crisis position now where it becomes less and less habitable for ourselves, for human society. And if we don't stop global heating very quickly, there will be increasingly large areas in the tropics that will become uninhabitable for humans, and we will have to relocate billions of people to higher latitudes where we can still live.
Stefan Rahmstorf is co-chair of the Department of Earth System Analysis at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and professor of ocean physics at the University of Potsdam, just outside Berlin. Read more about Earth's oceans in a warming world at greenplanetmonitor.net. are from Mars, women from Venus, John Gray wrote back in the 1990s. Science sees it another way. Male and female brains are wired differently, which explains lots. Why relationships work or not, how men's and women's brains age, get damaged, or stay resilient. Why men have such a hard time listening. Here's a story about that.
Jim,
Cheryl,
answer me this.
How
come you can remember every sports statistic in history, but you can't remember one simple thing I told you last night?
An age-old complaint in the battle of the sexes. TV actor Jim Belushi turns to brain science in his defense.
It's just simple biology. The male brain is wired for like sports stats and technical stuff. And the female brain is wired to take in feelings and recipes and fashion.
In a neurosciences lab at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Jim's male chauvinist theory is under scrutiny. And here are brains in bottles. Veteran brain researcher Sandra Whittleson shows me her collection of over 100 brains sitting on a bench top in bottles of formaldehyde.
So like here would be the main pieces of the brain in here, brain 121, and then this would be when we took out some of the individual pieces.
Whittleson has been collecting human brains for years, starting with Albert Einstein's. The differences between men's and women's, especially in the language and speech regions, interest her greatly.
One could go on and list literally hundreds of anatomical and chemical differences between the brains of men and women, and this would be true, in other animals as well.
Whittleson's studies revolve around brain lateralization, anatomical and functional differences between people's right and left cerebral hemispheres just above the ears, and their degree of connection.
It appears that there is a more generalized interconnectivity in the female brain than in the male brain. The male brain is more specialized, more modified, has more independent modules. In a way, I think it's more vulnerable, and I think it has the potential for less plasticity.
Women's brains are definitely different from men's brains.
At a brain research unit in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Dr. Apostolos Georgopoulos and his colleagues are measuring the brain waves and cognitive skills of hundreds of healthy women, ranging in age from 30 to over 100, and following them forward in time. Other studies are being carried out on men. The differences are striking.
What we have found is that women in many different tasks process information about 5 times faster than men.
Women process
women's
brains
brains
process faster than men.
Yeah, much faster, and use much less of their brain to do identical cognitive performance.
Apparently, female brain speed and efficiency come at a cost.
Women seem to use certain parts of their brain much more efficiently, but if these are hit, they are in big trouble. Men have more distributed processing, and they are more easy to get by, for damages.
Back at her McMaster University Brain Lab, Sandra Whittleson points out that men's brains are vulnerable too. At the tender age of 5 weeks, male embryos get doused in testosterone, changing them and their brains forever.
The male brain has undergone a sexual differentiation in utero. And if something should go wrong, it could affect the male brain more than the female brain.
Just admit you weren't listening to me.
I was listening, Cheryl. I just didn't take it in.
Science is just beginning to plumb the diversity of networks in people's brains, each as unique as its owner's DNA. How the 100 billion neurons in an adult brain get hardwired, differently so in men and women, how neural circuits determine sexual or gender identity, recover from damage, or age healthily, are tantalizing mysteries. One thing is known for sure: the differences between men's and women's brains are a source of both aggravation and amusement.
Okay, if it's biology, how come Andy hears me when I talk about that stuff?
Actually, I don't. I just smile and nod, but all I hear is this hellish buzzing.
Read more about women's and men's brains at greenplanetmonitor.net. You are listening to the Green Planet Monitor. I'm David Kattenberg. The Islamic Republic of Iran is routinely described as the most malign and aggressive force across the Persian Gulf and Middle East, indeed around the world. Iran does have its proxies, militant allies in Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon. Its own forces are stationed in Syria. U.S. forces are stationed in neighboring Iraq. Unlike the U.S., Iran hasn't actually attacked another country since the mid-19th century. In contrast, since its founding in 1948, Israel has attacked Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, according to the U.S. Institute of Peace, a U.S. government-funded institution. Israel has allegedly conducted at least 24 operations against Iran, including assassinations, drone strikes, and cyber attacks. Israeli military chief Aviv Kochavi admitted more than 500 aerial assaults on Syria during 2020. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights has documented 9 strikes since the start of 2023. This past February, 15 people were killed by an Israeli airstrike on central Damascus. Then there's Little Lebanon. Israel attacked Lebanon for the first time in 1978. In the summer of 1982, between 15 and 20,000 died in the course of Israel's aerial assault on Beirut. 40 years later, Israeli fighter jets and drones penetrate Lebanese airspace on an almost daily basis, generating constant noise. Lawrence Abu Hamdan has documented Israeli sonic attacks. Born in 1985 in Amman, Jordan, Abu Hamdan is a specialist in audio analysis, sonic arts, forensic audio analysis, and the politics of listening.
I think many Lebanese know that they hear them so often, but when you really start to do the math and add everything up and patch all this information together, which had never been done before, by the way, I was the first person to gather and accumulate all this information. The numbers told a different story. They said that, we could work out some key pieces of information and dispel some key myths. Actually, a lot of people here think that those planes are heading to Syria for military operations in Syria, and Lebanon is just a bypass route. That's not true. We actually realize that when I look through the database that we've amassed now, there's only 2 occasions where flights, F-35s or drones left, or F-16, sorry, fighter jets or drones, we can say, left Lebanese airspace and entered Syria. 2 occasions of 22,111 flights. So this is really an operation specific to Lebanon. Once we understand that, we have to ask the questions of why this is happening, for whose benefit this is playing out to, and what is the purpose of such an operation. It's not also quick flyovers. I think the idea that these are on way to mission somewhere else assumes a quick and straight path. But the average flight time of an unmanned aerial vehicle is over 4 hours in the airspace. Some of them go up to 30 hours. And when we add up all the duration over the last 15 years of Israeli combat vehicles in the airspace, we get to the staggering number of 8.5 years. So that means for more than half of the last 15 years, there has been Israeli jets or drones in the atmosphere. So it is really constant. It is concentrated. It is specifically concentrated on Lebanon. And that's what we could reveal by amassing this data.
What are these aircraft that are flying over Lebanon? What kinds of aircraft are they? What kinds of unmanned aerial vehicles are they? And where are they going? And why are they flying through Lebanese airspace?
Unmanned aerial vehicle can be 2 things. It can either be the large Heron or Hermes drones that we see. Often you see similar things in Afghanistan or Pakistan.
They're almost like small planes.
They're small planes. They're also jet powered, jet fueled, but they're unmanned. And unmanned can also be these quadcopters that sometimes get knocked down by the Lebanese defense or by Hezbollah or someone like that. These quadcopters are a bit larger than commercial drones. But the vast majority, I think over 13,000, are the large Predator, the ones which are equipped with a lot more surveillance and capacities for bombardment also. Yeah, and they've been used a couple of times. There's been a couple of drone strikes, but the vast majority is surveillance, mass, indiscriminate surveillance of a foreign nation, which is unprecedented.
And now, so before we get to the jet fighters and the jet fighters, these surveillance drones and larger surveillance craft, what are they surveilling? What are they taking pictures of? Where are they going?
The two most common trajectories so let's say the drone's most common trajectory, the large drone or what we commonly call drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, common trajectory is to circle the southern regions of Lebanon. When I say southern regions, it's basically from the border area with Israel all the way up to Nabatiyeh, Saida, Sur, all that area, and down and out through Nabatiyeh. Out through Naura in the southern coast. The jet fighter, on the other hand, the fighter jet, actually most commonly enters in pairs from the southern border over Naura, also over the sea. It flies up the entire coastline and comes back down over the mountain range. So it goes up and down the whole country, and they circle areas all over the country. Both are in fact used for surveillance. So the F-35 is well known now for its reconnaissance capacities more than its fighter capacities. Even they're called fighter jets. Of course, the F-35 is much louder. It covers much more ground. So it's the one that is, what we're used to hearing. And the drone is, of course, more kind of persistent. It's an A sharp, actually. It's an A. It just hangs in the atmosphere. And sort of as it's circling, it's undulating and persistent. So they're very different kinds of acoustic experience.
So these craft are flying over Beirut as well as.
Oh yes. Almost the vast majority of fighter jets go over Beirut, go over Tripoli, go all the way up to Hermel in the north, and come back down the Bekaa Valley down through the mountain range in the south. The vast majority of them have that trajectory.
And this is a daily experience? This is daily?
It averages to a daily experience. It's not like every day like clockwork, but it averages out to like I said, more than half of the last 15 years there's been a jet or drone in the sky. So it's constant, near constant.
And what are they surveilling? What are they capturing? What are they photographing? What are they recording? What are they listening to? What are they monitoring? What are they looking for?
Well, I think I don't know, to be perfectly honest. I'm not in the Israeli Defense Forces. I don't know. What I can say, though, is that with also satellite technology, this way exceeds the necessary levels of surveillance. It's 22,000 jets is not a necessary is not a necessary number. Let's say like that. What I'm trying to say is that things. I think that surveillance is just one part of the story. It's a big part of the story because it's if they are taking hundreds and thousands of pictures and recording phone calls and reading cell towers and whatever else they're doing, it means it's mass and indiscriminate, and all of us are being listened to.
And they're doing that? Are they doing that? Are these drones and these F-35 fighter jets capable of actually monitoring conversations, communications that are coming off of towers and cell phones and stuff?
Certainly. In fact, according to one ex-Air Force general, it's referred to as something called pinging the system, where in fact you fly and then you start to pick up what people are saying about the flight itself. It's also a kind of self-feeding system of surveillance, where it also kind of monitors the response to the flights. Let's say people are feeling they're under, so the idea is under a kind of in the logic of militarism is that if you see a drone, you might move something that you shouldn't have, or you might change location of something. But it could also be that they, when they circle over regions which are historically friendly to Israel in Lebanon, like in January 2020, I believe. In January 2021, they were circling a lot over Jounieh, and there it's some analysts say, one Lebanese Air Force general I spoke to said that was basically to check to see how what the discourse on the Israeli drone is in those regions that are historically friendly to Lebanon. You really don't know, but I think it's a lot of things. It far exceeds the necessity for surveillance, and therefore it leads us to ask other questions of what they're doing, which I have some answers to.
Please.
So I think some of it is training. I think it's essentially a defenseless sky. So a lot of it could be training. We also have to look at the sort of history of the development of the F-35, the recent history of that, and sort of speculate backwards from there. This is a $400 billion investment globally. That investment was, I believe, 7 countries. Then there's the countries who buy the plane for $100 million a plane. Germany was the most recent purchaser now. And so there is a great amount of resources and investment in this plane. Israel is the only country in the world which has the right to adapt and change the onboard system on that plane. The F-35s come with strict instructions. No one who buys that plane, even those who invested in its production, like Denmark and these countries, can have to get permission to service the plane from the Pentagon, and have to most commonly use US-run facilities to service them themselves. They cannot actually touch anything. The only country who can touch and adapt the system and repair it and service it and do what they want to it and experiment with it is Israel. They have a unique position in that way. Now, I don't see that as a kind of story of political affiliation. I see that as simply the fact that Israel has the most real-world opportunity to test and develop these weapon systems on behalf of all the countries who invested this $400 billion into it. If you're in the Netherlands, one of the other investors, you don't really have much airspace to try out and do this thing. You certainly don't have any hostile airspace, right? In which you can fly low and do whatever you want and terrorize people. But Israel does, and they have it in the space of Lebanon. So I think one of the other myths of the Lebanese atmosphere is that it's defenseless, it's open, it's worthless, anyone can enter and leave, and our sovereignty means nothing. But actually, when you look at it in terms of this kind of scale of investment, it's a highly prized piece of real estate, almost a kind of natural resource that's being extracted and exploited by international militarism, not only Israel, but for and on behalf of international militarism.
Now, I want to get to the question of what impact this has on the Lebanese people psychologically. What's it like to have F-35s flying through your airspace over time overhead and hearing the buzz of drones? But this is astonishing that Israel invades Lebanese airspace and launches incursions through Lebanese airspace totally unhindered on average on a daily basis, and gets away with it. Does the Lebanese government complain? I mean, the Lebanese military doesn't have the capacity to interdict these flights or much less shoot them down. Israel is just free to invade Lebanese airspace as it wishes, and it does so constantly, and the international community is aware of it and doesn't do anything. Does the Lebanese government complain at the United Nations about this?
Well, these are several points that we need to address, and I think what you perfectly point to is one of the last aims of these incursions, which is, of course, to intimidate. They are deeply intimidating. The sound of an F-35, a hostile military vehicle, wherever you are, above your head, will remind you that aerial bombardment is always close by. It can happen at any time. It can happen tomorrow. It could happen in the afternoon, right? So what that does over time is, of course, like many things in Lebanon, mean that life become quite precarious. It somehow is a sort of adds to a set of pressure points already, a series of hinge points, I would say, where the Lebanese government is already failing to provide basic stability and security for its people because of their own corruption and exploitation.
But does the Lebanese Air Force not put planes up, fighter jets of its own? What kinds of fighter jets does Lebanon have?
Lebanon doesn't really have fighter jets. It has these Super Tucanos, which are these are sort of small fighter plane kind of things. And
do they not have? I mean, of course, they're no match to an F-35.
No,
but there's never any attempt on the part of the Lebanese government to interdict these flights or to even shoot them down.
I mean, you're talking about the largest military in the world. I mean, not the largest military, but per capita, one of the most well-equipped militaries in the world. I don't think it makes sense, even if you can hit them down, to hit them down, right? I think there's an implicit understanding that it doesn't really make. If you do the math, it's never going to go in your favor.
But does the Lebanese government complain to the Israeli government?
Well, there's not really an active channel of communication, but they complain to the United Nations.
And the United Nations does nothing.
And the United Nations does nothing. Not only does it do nothing, it has the capacity to actually publish the data that I've put together. Why has it taken a private individual, right, to put this information together? Why hasn't the UN done it? They've all had the capacity. Why hasn't the Lebanese government done it? Why hasn't Hezbollah done it? Okay, Hezbollah claims to be the resistance to the UN, to Israel, right? This website is a direct attack. The website I've published is a direct attack against Hezbollah. And if people don't see it, they have to ask themselves, if Hezbollah claim to be the resistance, they've had 22,000 chances to resist, and they've taken none of them. So what this website is trying to show, equally as it's trying to show that Israel is intimidating and threatening people, is trying to show that Hezbollah uses, just like Israel uses them as a bogeyman to cover up their real intentions and their real operations, which is, of course, widely reported to be narcotics, and they have no interest in protecting or defending the Lebanese people. Resistance is simply an alibi for them to continue other kinds of informal operation.
And what impact does this have on the headspace and the psychological, emotional well-being of Lebanese?
Well, like I said before, it's atmospheric.
It's acoustic violence.
It's acoustic violence. It's not loud. It's not very loud, right? I mean, I think sometimes it's loud, but maybe let's say on 2 or 3 occasions in the last 15 years have they gone so low as to break glass and do this kind of thing. And do the sonic booms. That's not really what they do. It's really just sort of hangs in the atmosphere. It activates the background. It's just there. The health effects, which I show, I put about 17 peer-reviewed studies on my website, which show there are specific health effects to hearing such jets. Hypertension, most commonly blood pressure increase, which over time causes increased calcium deposits in the heart, strokes, etc. These are all effects from the sort of stress of hearing that. Also sleep deprivation, sleep effects. But like I said, these are stress effects. These are stressors. Very hard to isolate from other stressful scenarios. So these things cannot be seen, in their as separated entities. And I think that's why sound is so useful in this regard, because sound isn't directional. It doesn't point you, it doesn't fire at you like a gun. It exists in your milieu, in your environment. It overtakes your environment. It consumes your environment. It's omnidirectional. You don't know where it's coming from, right? And I think that becomes somehow almost metaphorically important for understanding how the atmosphere is being weaponized against those who live and breathe its air.
Lawrence Abuhamdan is a specialist in audio analysis, sonic arts, and forensic audio analysis. He has testified as an expert witness at the UK Asylum and Immigration Tribunal and produced evidence for Amnesty International, Defence for Children International, and the UK group Forensic Architecture. Abuhamdan is also the founder of airpressure.info. You can find that site at the Green Planet Monitor website, www.greenplanetmonitor.net. That's it for today's GPM, coming to you from Earth Chronicle Productions, Breda in the Netherlands. Listen, read, and watch more Earth stories at greenplanetmonitor.net. And please subscribe. A pop-up box will be popping up real soon. I'm David Kattenberg. Over and out for now.